The wedding hall gleamed with perfection, at least on the surface. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over tables adorned with delicate lace and fragrant flowers, each carefully chosen by my hands, each petal and ribbon paid for with my own blood and sweat. I had planned every detail for months, sparing no effort or expense, imagining my son's smile as he walked into a dream he barely knew I had built for him. Yet here I was, seated in the kitchen, the hub of the staff's whispered movements and clanging silverware, invisible to the world outside. The bride had orchestrated this, of course, suggesting it as some token of helpfulness, a polite way to keep me out of sight while she basked in the spotlight I had meticulously arranged. I sat at a small, unassuming table, hands folded neatly in my lap, watching from the pass-through window as guests arrived and admired the flowers, the table settings, the lavish cake. My name would not be spoken tonight. My contributions unnoticed, my presence a minor inconvenience best tucked away in a corner. I forced a smile, nodding politely to a passing waiter, my lips curling into the practiced mask of civility. My heart, however, thudded unevenly in my chest, a mix of betrayal, anger, and disbelief. How could my own son allow this? How could he not see the indignity? The bride floated among the guests, her laughter light and airy, masking the sting of entitlement that clung to her like perfume. She praised herself for the arrangements, as if she had selected the flowers, orchestrated the seating, or negotiated the catering. She had not. Every choice had been mine, every expense my sacrifice, and yet the world around me would see her as the architect of this moment, while I was confined to this back room, the mother who paid for it all, now relegated to invisible status. I took a deep breath, tasting the sterile smell of polished countertops and cleaning solution. The kitchen was no paradise, but it was quiet, offering me a vantage point that strangely granted a kind of control. From here I could see everything without being seen. I watched the band tune their instruments, the bar staff arranging bottles and glasses, the flowers arranged in the centerpieces, my flowers meticulously coordinated, ready to be admired by guests who would never know who had placed them there. The irony was not lost on me. I smiled wider, a silent acknowledgement to myself. They might have stolen the recognition, but they could not steal my presence in this creation. Memories of the planning months, late nights negotiating with vendors, careful calculations to stay within a budget that stretched my limits, endless phone calls and appointments, flooded me. Each decision I had made, each sacrifice I had endured, was a testament to love and devotion, and yet that love had been repaid with invisibility. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any financial worry or logistical problem I had ever faced. My son, my sweet boy, had allowed this. I had hoped he would intervene, that he would recognize the cruelty of this act, but he smiled politely at me when I walked by, oblivious, charmed by his bride's performance, unaware, or unwilling to be aware, of the injustice. And so I stayed quiet, letting my lips form the perfect curve of civility, letting my eyes shine with nothing but warmth as I observed the chaos of perfection outside this kitchen. I felt the anger simmer beneath my calm, a slow burn that demanded patience and cunning rather than confrontation. There was no room for melodrama here, no satisfaction in loud argument or public embarrassment. If revenge was to come, it would be quiet, measured, and utterly satisfying. For now I watched, I smiled, I planned. They thought they had hidden me away, but in truth, I was exactly where I needed to be, unnoticed, underestimated, and preparing for the day when dignity and justice would quietly reclaim their place at this wedding. From my hidden perch in the kitchen, I watched the hall as if seeing a carefully scripted play unfold, though every smile and laugh now felt like a personal betrayal. The bride floated from table to table, radiant and radiant in her ignorance of the truth, sipping champagne with a grace I had never witnessed before. My son was at her side, nervous but clearly enchanted, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing behind the closed kitchen door. I clenched my hands together beneath the table, the polished surface cool beneath my fingertips, and breathed steadily. Every inhale reminded me to remain calm. Every exhale whispered a silent promise: patience, observation, action. I could hear the murmur of guests, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the faint strains of music beginning to play in the background. The band, another detail I had arranged, was late, though no one but me knew the truth. The bar, pristine and fully stocked because of my meticulous planning, remained locked unmanned, as though waiting for some invisible cue. I smiled to myself, a small, private curl of lips that went unnoticed by anyone else. If the bride thought she had orchestrated the night entirely, she had no idea how fragile her perfection truly was. I remembered the months leading up to this day, countless sleepless nights calculating costs, negotiating with vendors, and making impossible choices so that my son could have the wedding of his dreams. I had imagined myself walking into the hall, feeling pride and love, maybe even catching the gaze of guests who would marvel at the elegance of everything I had created. But instead, I had been cast aside like an afterthought, relegated to a corner where I could only witness the glory being stolen from me. The hurt cut deep, sharper than any financial strain or logistical headache I had endured. It was personal, it was intimate, and it fueled something far more potent than anger, something I could wield with careful precision. As I observed the bride's movements, I began quietly strategizing. There would be no rash confrontations, no tearful accusations. Those would be predictable, and predictable was something she would use against me. No, my revenge would be subtle, clever, and unforgettable, not in its cruelty, but in its poetic justice. The band could be delayed. The flowers could be missing. The bar could remain closed. The night could proceed, seemingly normal to anyone else, but I would hold the strings, guiding chaos ever so gently from behind the curtain. I felt a perverse thrill in my quiet plotting, the kind of satisfaction that comes not from malice, but from reclaiming control. I had been invisible, underestimated, dismissed, but the night was mine to orchestrate in ways no one could see. The bride might have the spotlight, but she could not touch the power I now quietly claimed. I could see her adjusting her dress, speaking animatedly with guests, completely unaware that every carefully arranged piece of her perfect evening rested on fragile threads I could quietly sever without anyone suspecting. There was a serenity in my silence, a profound strength in restraint. I smiled again, this time wider, savoring the anticipation. Let her believe she controlled the evening. Let her bask in the praise she had not earned. Every clink of silverware, every soft laugh from the hall, every step she took across the polished floor, was part of the tableau she thought she commanded. I, however, was the hidden architect of the impending unraveling, and the knowledge gave me an unspoken power that made my heart beat not with hurt, but with careful, deliberate satisfaction. I leaned back in my chair, watching the guests, watching the bride, watching my son, all caught in the illusion I had once dreamed to share with them openly. The fire of betrayal had been replaced by a cold, calculating patience. My plan would unfold not in haste but in quiet precision. By the time the night ended, they would all see the truth, not in confrontation, but in the subtle collapse of perfection. And I, who had been ignored, dismissed, and humiliated, would finally witness the beauty of justice served in silence. The first subtle disruptions began almost imperceptibly, each one carefully placed so that no one would immediately suspect foul play. I moved among the staff with quiet grace, offering polite directions, a smile here, a nod there, never revealing the calculations that had already taken shape in my mind. The band, which had been scheduled to arrive at 6, was now delayed. Mere minutes at first, nothing alarming. A few guests noticed, murmuring with curiosity as the hall grew quieter than expected, but the bride's confident laughter drowned their unease. My lips curved into a discreet smile. The seeds of chaos had been planted. Next, the bar remained locked, the staff mysteriously absent. Drinks that should have flowed freely now remained behind glass and ice, untouched, while guests began to murmur with mild confusion. The bride's practiced composure faltered for a moment as she noticed the gap, but she quickly recovered, waving it off with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. From my vantage point in the kitchen, I observed her carefully, savoring the micro-expressions, tiny flickers of panic and uncertainty that told me she was beginning to lose her grip on the evening she had imagined as perfect. The flowers were the final touch, the most delicate of my contributions. Everywhere they appeared in the hall, they seemed slightly askew, petals not perfectly arranged, the bouquets a little too heavy on one side. Guests commented softly on the oddity, some speculating it was the florist's fault, others shrugging it off. The bride, however, could not hide her frustration, adjusting centerpieces repeatedly, tugging at the fabric of tablecloths, her smiles more brittle with each passing moment. I sipped my tea quietly, letting her flail in the small, controlled ways that would not alert anyone to the true architect of her discomfort. As the evening progressed, I continued to move in quiet, deliberate steps. I checked on the catering, adjusting schedules and subtly shifting orders so that some dishes arrived late, some plates lukewarm. The guests, initially oblivious, began to notice small imperfections, murmuring questions to one another. I remained composed, charming even, offering reassuring words as I discreetly guided events from the shadows. Every interruption, every misstep was like a brushstroke on a painting, deliberate, precise, and quietly devastating to the bride's sense of control. In the midst of this, I caught sight of my son, standing near the head table, smiling politely but with a growing frown. He glanced around, noticing the subtle chaos, sensing the difference between what he had imagined and the reality unfolding. I felt a pang of both sorrow and vindication, sorrow for his unawareness, vindication because, finally, He could witness what I had endured for months. I had not acted out of malice. I had acted out of necessity, from a desire to reclaim the dignity that had been denied to me. The bride's panic became more visible as the evening went on. She whispered hurried instructions to the staff, checked her phone repeatedly, and finally confronted the bandleader, only to be told with mild embarrassment that they would arrive much later than planned. She stormed briefly into the kitchen, her eyes searching for someone to blame, and I met her gaze with calm serenity, offering only a polite smile and a gentle, "I'll see if I can help." Her expression faltered, confusion flashing across her face. The realization that she had no control over the situation, that the evening was quietly slipping from her hands, began to settle in. By the time dinner began, the cracks in her perfect facade were unmistakable. Guests whispered, laughter felt forced, and the bride's composure was brittle, her anxiety masked by effort and bravado. I remained quietly at the periphery, poised, smiling, unassuming. But in reality, the orchestrator of every subtle disruption. No one would ever suspect that the woman they had ignored and dismissed held the power to shape the evening's events so completely. Sitting back in my chair, I let a slow, satisfied breath escape. The revenge was not loud, not dramatic. It was delicate, precise, and utterly perfect. The bride had stolen recognition, yes, but she could not steal control, not while I moved invisibly among the pieces I had so carefully placed. Tonight I had become the silent architect of justice, and the satisfaction of quiet, patient vengeance filled me more completely than I could have imagined. By the time the dessert was being served, the wedding hall had lost much of its initial shine. The band, delayed beyond reason, had finally arrived, but the music was discordant, a tangle of missed notes and awkward pauses. The bar had opened, but the earlier absence of drinks had left a subtle tension in the room. Whispered observations circulating among the guests like a low hum. The flowers, once expected to impress, now seemed slightly wilted, the arrangements uneven, their vibrancy dulled by the imperfections I had quietly orchestrated. I sat back in the kitchen, a cup of tea cooling beside me, and observed with calm satisfaction. The bride's panic had evolved into visible frustration. She moved from table to table, her laughter strained, her attempts at charm now tinged with desperation. Her smiles were no longer effortless, they were measured, brittle, and full of tension. She glanced toward me once briefly, her eyes narrowing as if sensing an unseen force at work. I met her gaze with unflinching serenity, my own smile calm and composed. She recoiled subtly, the realization dawning that the perfect control she believed she had over the evening was slipping through her fingers. I could see my son approaching, his expression troubled. He had noticed the cracks, the minor missteps, and the subtle chaos that had crept into his dream wedding. I allowed him to reach me in the kitchen before speaking, my voice soft but steady, carrying the weight of truth. "Do you see it now?" I asked, gently. "This isn't what I envisioned, and yet it is exactly what I endured when I was ignored, dismissed, and hidden away. Every choice I made, every sacrifice I bore, went unnoticed. But tonight, the truth is quietly revealing itself." He looked at me, guilt and understanding mingling in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't realize," he began, voice faltering. I shook my head, not to chastise, but to release the burden he had unknowingly carried. "You didn't see it because you were caught up in their illusion?" I said. "But illusions are fragile. And sometimes, justice doesn't announce itself with anger. It arrives quietly, without ceremony, without apology. It simply unfolds." The bride, unaware of the private exchange, attempted one final flourish, calling for attention and trying to rally the guests, but her words were met with polite murmurs, distracted glances, and the faint buzz of unease. The evening's elegance had been disrupted, not catastrophically, not violently, but with subtle precision that left her exposed, her control undermined, and her confidence fractured. She moved with a certain desperation now, adjusting a centerpiece here, checking a table setting there, but every effort seemed to slip further from her grasp. I allowed myself a small, private smile, the first genuine one of the evening. The satisfaction I felt was not rooted in cruelty, it was rooted in balance. The humiliation I had endured, the dismissal I had suffered, the invisible hand that had been forced into silence, all of it was being acknowledged, indirectly, through the subtle collapse of perfection that I had quietly guided. I had not shouted, I had not confronted, and I had not ruined lives. I had simply restored dignity in the only way possible at that moment. As the night wound down, guests began to leave, many commenting on the uniqueness of the evening, the unpredictability that had made it memorable. The bride's forced smile softened into exhaustion, the tension in her shoulders finally easing, but not with triumph, only with the reluctant acknowledgement that she had lost a measure of the control she so prized. My son stood beside me, his hand finding mine in a silent gesture of understanding and gratitude. I squeezed his hand gently, feeling the warmth of connection, the restoration of truth, and the quiet, enduring strength of a love that had not been diminished by betrayal. When the last guests departed, I lingered briefly in the hall, surveying the remnants of the night. The flowers, the music, the empty glasses, all bore witness not to chaos, but to subtle justice. I had smiled, I had endured, and I had reclaimed my dignity. And in that quiet victory, I found something far sweeter than the applause. I had once sought the satisfaction of knowing that true power often lies not in control, but in the patience, intelligence, and quiet courage to act with precision, even when no one is watching.